Yeah, we always notify people in regards to it a couple weeks in advance, or we try to. Yeah, so if I go to community, I can go to the workshops, but maybe there should be like a faster link to that. Interesting. ACDSee workshop of preferring emails before. Yeah, for sure. Those are something too that answer your question, Martin, as well. Those get the workshop emails get sent out a couple weeks in advance. So if people have them in like their spam folder or something like that, or if they come through their promotional folder, which they do for me, because I have Gmail, but they do for me, and so they might just pop in right into people's promotions, which aren't always the fastest way to see that something is coming about, you know. But that's good to hear. The workshop page is getting a lot of clicks, so that's good. I will make sure to talk to my coworkers and see if we can get that a little bit more front and center, so it's easier for people to see. Freddie, any success with the done method of saving, or I guess the clicking away from development? Hi, Tor. Hi, Thomas. Hi, Peter. Yeah, we're going to be starting shortly here. I'm just kind of going over some stuff with some questions. So we're going to talk about a variety of different methods of cloning and blending and smart erase today, I guess, with the goal of basically talking about how do we erase things from images. And ACDSee has a variety of different methods that can achieve the same result, some of which that are going to be doable in professional, some of which are going to be doable in ultimate. Yeah, it's actually really cool, and I'm going to give you some examples of when there's sort of best tools designed for specific situations. Yeah. Yeah, no, so Freddie, okay, so I tried with the JPEG, I clicked the done and saved the file, but it did not overwrite the original file because I'm still able to go back or revert to the original. Yeah, so when you say that, let's go back to our landscape photos here. So I can click on these two landscape images, right? And I can go to process and I can go to restore to original. That's not a bug, just to be clear. So what that is because ACDSee is, for the most part, fairly non-destructive. What ACDSee is doing in this case is, like I said, it's creating, it's basically writing to the file the information that you've added to it. So in the case of you're making some development adjustments, it's writing those parameters to the file. Now that it doesn't change the fact that that file is like, it is saved in as those qualities, like a JPEG is a writable file versus a raw file, which always has to reference that XMP profile. So make no mistake, Freddie, like that file, that JPEG is altered, you know, like it's just that it gives you the option of basically taking those fields that ACDSee writes to and restoring them to their blank qualities or their default qualities. So you did by all stretch of imagination overwrite the file. You have overwritten the file. It's not as though you've created a new file. It's just that JPEGs provide a sort of a field by which you can sort of revert. Not a bug. That's good. That's ideal. Awesome. Thank you, Tor. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, because it is. I've been thinking about that recently, where you know, it's still, you can easily navigate to it on the website, but it might be nice to just have a little button on the front page or something like that that just says, you know, join our workshop. I'll talk to Andrea, who does all of our workshops or all our website stuff, to see if I can get something on the front page that makes it a bit easier. So, okay, so Freddie said, so if I click on save and then click a save as, I can't click on the same file name. So save as, right, is not overwriting a file. So save as is creating a whole new file. So in the case of this developed image, when I go to save as, what it's doing is it's prompting me to to create to save a new file. But yeah, I don't believe you can just save over. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't give you the opportunity to save over this original file. That would just be a function of, like I said, going to done and saving it that way. Saving as is always creating a new file. Okay, let's get started. We're talking today. Freddie, feel free to send me an email too, and I can maybe answer more of these questions in an email as well. I believe we have we have an email thread, or had an email thread going, didn't we? But yeah, there's me just for, oops, that's not to everyone. There we go. Just in case anyone has a question actually in a workshop. So my email is aprice at acdsystems.com. And yeah, so basically in an email, if you have a question or something like that comes up during a workshop that I don't have time, or maybe it's not suited to the workshop to answer, that's a great place to ask those questions. If you have suggestions for the product, I do want to hear those. So I actively send those to our developers, and they are actively happy to receive them. So if you're like looking for a specific tool or something like that, or you have a question about the product, or maybe even in the case where you have a support question, just shoot me a message too, and I'll try to get the support team to interact with you in regards to that. Yeah, but I'm really a big fan of when people send me suggestions for the feature for the product, because the development team is really appreciative of that, because basically the way that the development team works is I'll just forward those emails to them, and then they have like a backlog folder that they save those emails in, that they reference whenever they go to do new product updates. Because quite literally, we're not a small company by any stretch of imagination, but we're not a huge company either. So we're sort of like this moderate sized tech company that really does reference those that feedback when we go to make updates. So they're very grateful for that dialogue going, and then they try to integrate as many as they can. But there's often stuff too that gets missed or gets added the next year or whatever in terms of features. So we're always appreciative of that. I just want to put a focus on that. So. Okay, so let's talk about, well, first off, we're going to talk about Smart Erase, and then we're going to navigate to, pivot to talking about blended cloning and cloning in general, healing, that sort of thing. And then we're going to pivot again to a sort of a copy and paste method of sort of addressing parts of your image that you want to remove. So I'm going to open up a image here in edit mode, and we're going to talk about why this is a bad image for the purpose of Smart Erase. So, and then we're going to talk about better examples of what to do here. So Smart Erase is not an infallible tool by any stretch of the imagination. And so if we're looking at this image, there's a variety of problems that are going to arise when we go to Smart Erase. So first and foremost, when we look at this image, okay, so we have a pattern. Okay, so I'm just going to draw this guideline here. This is our pattern. So this pattern would create a problem when it comes to Smart Erasing. And the reason why is because when we go to Smart Erase, what's happening is we're referencing areas around our subject to smart fill that subject with. So when we have a pattern, it causes a bit of issues there, because then we have to make sure that this pattern aligns correctly with that of the background. So the reason why I'm focusing on this now is to sort of illustrate basically the limitations of Smart Erase, and then talk about where Smart Erase really succeeds, excels, and then some situations where we can combine it to get a best result. So the next thing is we have pretty dramatic changes in lighting. So right here, we have a really bright source. And then right here, this area, we sort of have a lot more midtones. And our subject here, let's just say our subject is this woman right here. We want to try to get rid of her in this image. Well, that's going to cause a problem, because there's a lot of really bright light here, and there's a lot of midtones, and there's lots of dark sections in and around our image as well. So we got two issues here. First issue is that there's this pattern that we need to try to replicate, right? Which is this crosswalk here. The second is that we have a degree of light variation that's causing a lot of issues. And then the third, and this is going to be the most obvious to everyone, is there's a lot going on. Visually, there's a ton of people walking right here and right here. So when we go to, and there's also a ton of cars in the background near her sight line. So when we go to update this image, or when we go to try to smart erase her out of this image, there's going to be some struggling in terms of that. The other thing too, which is important to note, because this image has a strong light source here, we also have this enormous shadow that we would technically have to smart erase out in addition to our subject. So long story short, this is a hellish image to try to operate a smart erase on, just because there's so much going on. And so when you reference your own photos, when you look at your own photos, keep these qualities in mind. Qualities like, are there patterns? Qualities like, is there a ton of light variation? How much is going on in the image? And then finally, is there any shadows and things like that that create a problem for this? Oops, didn't mean to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to showcase this removal here to try to get a better feel for that. And then we'll talk about situations where smart erase is awesome. So let's just go ahead and let's erase our subject here. So smart erase is one of the brush tools, or I guess one of the fill tools in ACDSee. So you can navigate to it from the top menu bar. And then how it works is you just click on your subject or click on your area, and then you just hold down until you've completely surrounded your subject. Tighter selections are best. So what you don't want to do is select a subject too far out away from the subject itself, because what smart erase does is it references what you've selected, and it says, okay, great, Adam, I see that you've selected, in this case, the outline of this woman. I'm going to make sure to fill it with information that is not that person. So it's going to look around for pixels nearby and try to operate a function, or try to operate off of that. So if you include too much of the area that surrounds the subject in this case, then it's going to omit that pixel information. So I'm going to click OK. And as you can see, this is a huge mess. I mean, so there's first and foremost, there's this sort of pattern that we get from, I think, the brick road here, but it looks like it's filling with this content right here. Because what is it doing? When I selected this area, it's looking for nearby pixels and pixel brightness. And it's suggesting, well, I don't know where to find those other than in this area right here. So it's filling it with that information. And then let's see, for this part right here, it looks like it might be filling it with this sort of information right here in terms of the lightness of the head here. It's searching for information right here and filling it with that. So because there's so much minute detail in this image, it's going to struggle with making a selection of this subject. There's nothing I would really suggest about this particular image. I think that this image is going to be just a really structurally difficult image to work with. So instead of focusing on too much of this image, let's talk about images where we can actually have an effect using a combination of smart erase and the clone tool. And just before I do that, I'll just showcase that the smart erase tool is just on this top menu bar here. And you can see that it's fifth from the top here. So let's navigate away from this image. Let's navigate to a different image. I'll just discard these changes. And we're going to talk about a super easy adjustment before we talk about, so I've sort of separated this into the good, the bad, the ugly, and the difficult. So this one's the easy. So we just talked about the bad. Let's talk about the good. So here's our subject in this image that we want to get rid of. And there's a lot less information and a lot less variation in terms of the color that's around our subject here, this is a sort of like almost a slam dunk for smart erase, because it has tons of information that's visually nearby it to reference that is within the same sort of color palette of the snow in this case. So it's going to look at the surrounding areas and fill it with this content around it, right? And then it's going to reference things like the color and tone of the sort of snowy, darker snowy patch that's here, which looks like it comes from a tree probably. And it's going to be able to fill that much better. And then the other thing too is there's just so much more space in regards to our image and a lot more homogeneity in this area. So this, as an example, would be a super easy image for Smart Erase to make an operation on. So let's just quickly do that. Once again, we're going to select Smart Erase, Control E here, and we're just going to select our subject and see how well we can make a edit here. And just as a note too, like my whole purpose of this this workshop is to allow you to get the most out of these tools. So I'm just going to go through, I'll select these polls. And once we have a good selection of our subject here, let's just let it run the operation. And we can fix up a couple spots here. Right there. And once you have a selection of your subject, once your subject is actually removed, you can just go through and make these spot adjustments to your image. So because there's way more space to play. And the other thing too is you might find, I'm actually not happy with that. So let's try another pass on our subject here. There's a little bit too much of our subject there. So I'm just going to try this again with a broader stroke this time. And let's try to select the whole thing like that. See if we can get a better result. Oh, I forgot a bit down here. That is a better result. Oh, that's a much better result actually. So I'm just going to focus these ones out right here. And so, yeah, so that's a much nicer removal than the previous one. And I think that might be just due to the fact that we can broaden our stroke there and not, when we're capturing those poles in our image, when these are separate from our actual main selection, it's maybe struggling with that area because we're having a little bit of the area that's not subject to the Smart Erase that's in the actual subject itself, like in between the legs or something like that. And it's going to create a little bit of blockiness there. So what we can do is just broaden our stroke in this case to sort of include those areas, not necessarily going outside of the main body, but getting that. And so when we look at this too, it's like when we zoom out on our image, I mean, there's things we can play around with in terms of cloning or maybe doing some heel work in here, but the actual major subject itself is taken out and it preserves the quality of the light in those areas. Does everyone see sort of and understand, generally speaking, how the Smart Erase is being applied to this area? How we can paint it on and sort of target different parts of this person's body to remove that. So Smart Erase was included in ACDSee, I want to say about 3 versions ago. Yeah, I want to say it was included recently. And it's a very powerful tool because it is creating it is automating a process here. There is a bit, not necessarily AI, it's not learning per se, but there is a degree of intelligence that the tool is referencing to sort of fill that area. So this would be a good example of something that, and then you have this area right here, which we can clean up because it's a bit soft. So we would just go into something like the repair tool. In this case, what we might want to do is straight up clone an element. So we can clone an element. Let's see here, maybe take something like this and just add it to that area. And maybe what we can do is use the heel tool to just soften this slightly right there. And yeah, even just a little bit right here. And then you can sort of zoom out and work on that, plug away on these different areas using these different tools, heel, clone, blended clone, and Smart Erase within the repair tool to sort of get the best result. So let's talk about I'll talk about all of these tools individually in a moment here. We're just going to navigate away from this, which is a relatively simple selection, to a much more complicated one. And we'll actually look at why these tools are really useful. So this is an image that I think kind of rides the line between a easy selection and a difficult selection, or sorry, easy and a bad selection. So who can isolate some factors that would make this Smart Erase of this person right here? So our subject is this one right here. I'm just curious, what would make this this Smart Erase a bit more challenging than, say, the last one? Who has some answers for me? Any thoughts? Yeah, nice. Okay. Yeah, Freddie and Sheila are on it. Yeah, the biggest problem is the floor squares. So we're going to talk about that extensively and how we can sort of mimic those floor squares. The light variation in this, it is true. There is a lot of light variation between these very dark figures and the very bright tiles. But I think that what we do have, Bernard, is we have enough actual space in between our subject here. Like if we look at the amount of space and our subject has, it's really like, if we look at it, it's really like this much space that our subject occupies that it has to work with in terms of, and even more if we sort of consider that this might be in addition to it and a little space down here. So our subject does have a fair amount of space involved, but there is a lot of light variation. So depending on how accurate our smart erase is, we might have to address some of that issue. And I guess we'll just find out because smart erase is ultimately truly random. So you're never going to get the same result when you smart erase once versus the next time. And then, yeah, you got a lot of similar people. That's true. Our operation in this case is going to try to isolate our subject here and remove her entirely. So we could do other things like trying to copy subjects and move them around. But this case, what we want to do is we want to take this person entirely out of our image. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to do this in 2 steps. The first step I'm going to do is I'm going to smart erase this person out. And we're probably going to be left with a bit of a blob here. And then what we can do is we can use the blended clone tool to reconstruct the tiles because we actually have a lot of power in the sense that we have a lot of reference tiles right here to work with. We have a lot of reference tiles up here to work with, and we have a lot of reference tiles right here to work with. So what we can do is we can use these reference tiles to sort of recreate that pattern underneath of it. And this is really cool. I was really excited I found this image because I think it perfectly is a perfect example of the power of these tools, but also a perfect example of how challenging some of these selections can be. And, you know, like when it comes down to it, not a lot of your selections, I mean, if you're just trying to remove somebody from a family photo, I mean, it's probably not going to be that complicated because it's probably has a fairly universal background going on. And but these are just examples of how we can sort of get a really high quality result while sort of working within the confines of an image that is a bit more complicated. So strategy. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in until basically when I do a smart erase, because when I click with the smart erase tool, there's not really a easy way for me to move the canvas while I'm clicking. So what I want to do is I just want to make sure that my whole subject is in view because I'm not going to be able to move the canvas while I'm in the tool. So this is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So we're going to make a selection right now. So once again, smart erase brush selected. I can also just click Control E to bring it up. And we're going to work with this base layer here. Just a quick note, smart erase is destructive. So if I wanted to preserve this original tile, which might make sense, what I can do is I can actually click the duplicate layer function. And with duplicate layer, I can rename this layer. So we could rename this layer to, we'll just call it smart erased layer. And then that will be the layer that we can reference based from our original here. So let's begin. I'm just going to make a selection of my subject here, following the contour of my selection's body here. And then we'll talk about what we're left with and see if we can recreate this. How many of you have had some unsuccessful smart removals that you figured were possible but couldn't figure out? Or vice versa, how many of you have had some really successful people that you've removed from your images? And maybe what were the circumstances? I'm just curious about why you'd be removing someone from an image. Or maybe removing something. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to make a selection like that. I think that's pretty good. I feel like my whole subject is selected, minus the little shadow that her feet make. but we'll address that issue in a moment. So I'm going to click OK. Lots of similar people. Yeah, okay. So we've removed our subject here. There's some, it's referencing this tile right here. So we're going to have to go through and we're going to have to probably erase this here and clean it up a little bit. But that's a good place to start from. And then we can use the blended clone tool to address some of these issues in here. So at first glance, this would look like an unsuccessful smart erase, but we have so much reference material to work here that this is actually not bad, and we can really work with this. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to see if I can get a better result down here. Let's see. That's much better. We can even just move those down. Yeah. And I'm just going to get this type bit out of here as well. And that one right here. Okay. Okay. So, okay. And everybody's who commented earlier, let's just hide our rulers for now. I'm just going to go to view and rulers to hide them here. Oops. I mean, hide guidelines. There we go. So everyone's who suggested the tiles in this case is correct. So the tiles creates the main issue because we can actually create a fairly homogeneous removal of the subject. Now, if the background in this case was one color or maybe a ombre of color, ACDSee is going to do a fairly good job of that. But because there's these tile lines, right? How is a random a smart erase tool going to get the result of being able to address that issue? That issue being, how is it going to be able to reposition those tiles? So let's just actually, for reference, let's just make another copy. I'm just going to duplicate my smart erase layer, and I'm just going to rename this one. And we're going to go, we're just going to call this blended clone. And this is the layer we're going to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this blended clone layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it into the repair tool. So the repair tool is where we were at previously that allows us a variety of different options. First and foremost, I can do a smart erase within the repair tool just as I did momentarily ago here, but it also gives me some other options. So there's heal, clone, and blended clone. So clone does exactly that. So clone, I'm going to right click to set a point here, and I can left click to set that. And so what clone does is it straight up copies an element of your image and pastes it, but it doesn't do so in a way that manages or works with the pre-existing lighting conditions of the areas around it. Let's look at something like heal now. So if I was to take this and heal it, what it does is it takes what you've copied and applies it, but it keeps in mind the lighting conditions here. And then blended clone is a little bit different. Blended clone will take what you've selected here, and it's going to place it, but it's going to try to keep in mind some degree of tone and the lighting condition as you place it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to primarily use the blended clone tool because I find like it is a good combination of both heal and clone. And I'm going to use it to basically replicate this floor pattern. And this is going to take a moment, but what we're going to do is we're going to select a subject like this, and then we're going to place it. And as I place it, you can see that it's going to sort of work with the pattern of the ground underneath the space, so that the color and tonality of the background is preserved. And this is really important because in this case, I'm working with a space, an area, right? That is actually slightly darker right here than the space next to it. So I'm just going to take these floor patterns because they exist right there, and I'm going to use them. I'm going to take this intersection pattern right here, and I'm going to place it. And I'm just going to work my way around here. I'll use this one right here. Actually, let's use this one right here to sort of add this floor pattern here. And I'm just going to use these where needed. The one thing I do wish this tool had is a way to rotate your clone, which I've requested for for the future. So I'm just going to go through, I'm going to select this here, going to place it. Again, I'm just using the blended clone to sort of make a gently copied that considers the lighting conditions of the area around it. Just place that there. Just place that there. And we're so close. There we are. The only thing that I don't like here is this little patch that's a bit darker because of the foot placement. So I'm going to just zoom out here and we're going to address that portion right here. But as you can see, that's a pretty faithful adjustment for this area right here, for this area that sort of exists where the rest of her torso was. It's just this area that's a bit darker down here that looks like it's a bit odd in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click done because I'm happy with this. I could probably play around actually now with the heal tool if I wanted to, and just see if I can, utilize these patterns here to work in. But I think what might be a better suggestion in this case is actually just making a selection of this area and then brightening it using it something like exposure or light EQ. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click done and we'll zoom out. And so we can see that now the blended clone is better than the smart erase layer, which is better than in this case, the base layer. So you can sort of see the progression of these adjustments. So now let's add one more duplicate and we'll rename this layer and we're going to call it, I guess we'll call it light EQ. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection using the lasso tool. So I could probably do this with a polygonal selection tool, but I think we'll just stick with the lasso selection tool here. And I'm operating on this light EQ layer here. And I'm just going to make a selection like this. Let's see if this is too big and whether or not we want to adjust it at all. So I'm going to make a selection right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, do I want to make a curves adjustment or a light EQ adjustment? Let's try light EQ to start and see how it works. So when I click light EQ after I have a selection, what it's going to do is it's going to create this mask for me. Does everyone see this mask thumbnail here, the black portion here? This is a very important element, so I just want to draw attention to it. So this mask thumbnail provides us with some very important information. So the black portion of the mask, okay, which is the portion of the mask that we did not select. So it is turned off for the effect of this adjustment. Versus the little circle element that we added here. Let's see if I can maybe darken it just so you can see it. So the portion of our image that we selected is going to be the recipient of this adjustment. So the white blob here represents this section right here, and then the black represents everything but that section. And when we talk about masks, what we're talking about is turning a portion of our image on versus turning a portion of our image off. So black is turned off and white is turned on. I just want to make sure that everyone sort of has a general understanding of this concept because masks are a bit different and they're, it's a little bit one of the more complicated but incredibly valuable tools in ACDSee, especially in edit mode and ultimate here. So what I'm going to do is, I think what I want to do is I want to brighten this portion here. So as you can see, if I brighten it too much, it's very visible here. So let's just see. So what I want to do is I want to find, this looks like this was the starting quality. So I'm just going to bring this up and let's see here. See without and then with. I might even want to do this effect again right here. I'm almost leaning towards a curves adjustment because it seems like we're sort of limited in terms of how much we can add here. So let's just do something right now where I'm going to, let's try this again with the curves. I'm just going to turn this effect off for a moment by using the little eye icon here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go select and selection basket from just the select drop down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this mask that I have here, this little mask, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to add that mask to the basket because we're going to use it momentarily. So I'm going to add a curves adjustment. And if we really crank the curves adjustment, we can see how stressed it is on over our whole image. But what I can do is I can take this mask that we've created and I can set this selection right here, selection number 1, as the mask of the selected layer, which is our curves adjustment. So I can actually move this onto this here. So we'll do that. And so now we can see that our thumbnail is the same as the one that we used in our selection basket here. And I'm just going to brighten this up until I'm happy with it. So off, on, off, on. What we're going to do is we're going to use this layer itself, and we're going to feather this layer so that we can see these adjustments in comparison to the area around it. So I'm just going to leave this curve right now. I know that it's a bit visible, but if we click on the actual thumbnail itself of the mask, we can feather the mask. So instead of it being a hard line, we can see that it's more gradiated from the edge here. And if we really pull it, it sort of smooths out this area here. So that effect is sort of being applied to the area around it in a gradiated way rather than a direct way like it is in this case. And so when we pull it up, so I'll just bring it up to about 70 in the mask properties here, this feathering here. And then we can play around more with the curve line itself until we're happy with that adjustment. And even just like a small change like that brightens it up and I think justifies the space really nicely. So let's just zoom out. And now in comparison to other parts of our image here, it sort of runs the same degree of detail. So again, without, it's a little bit dark. With, it sort of smooths it out a little bit. And I mean, I could probably play with this space forever. Let's see here, if I pull it down, there's less detail. Yeah, about there. But even then, just that even changed with the curves. And I think it was better than the light EQ adjustment if I compare them to. Yeah, the light EQ is a little bit less dramatic than needed. So whereas that is totally bright. And now it looks like a sunspot, just like all these other spots here where there's a high degree of exposure. So let's talk about what we did. Let's just delete this light EQ layer from the start to finish. So this is a fairly difficult subject removal here. And I think that this is a fairly faithful way to address this problem. And as Sheila and Freddie accurately pointed out, the issue is the tiles in this image. It's the tiles that causes a problem because there's the geometry there that we need to work with. But if we look at where our image, we had the ability to utilize some blank space nearby that had similar lighting conditions to really fulfill, and by using blended clone, we could sort of fill that area. So we started with this image, our image right here, our base layer, and then we isolated our subject and worked from there. So then what we did is we smart erased our layer using the smart erase tool just right here. And that was able to get rid of our subject and sort of maintain the lighting conditions of the area, which is really useful when we go to blended clone, because we need those lighting conditions to be relatively stable in this area and gradiated that for when we go to use the blended clone and actually take the texture of other areas around it. So when we blended clone, what we could do is we could take these little elements around us here, these little squares, and we literally copy and pasted those squares, as you can see, until it matched up with the squares that existed around it. And then what we did is we created this, I guess it wasn't a light EQ, it ended up being a curves adjustment, but we made a selection using the polygonal selection tool of the space that we wanted to address in terms of the brightness. And then we turned on that adjustment. In this case, we added these curves. And then the last thing that we did is we just adjusted the feathering of the actual curve itself so that the effect was applied in a smooth way rather than a sort of an egregious hard way. Does that make sense to everybody? Sort of the process involved to address or to remove the subject. Smart erase. So we started with the smart erase. We moved into a blended clone. And then we worked into the light EQ, I guess the curves layer with feathering to sort of address any lighting conditions. Yeah, Sheila, a square clone shape would have been beneficial. I totally agree. We could probably add more sort of in regards to the clone. I think one thing that would be really useful is being able to rotate the clone once you've set it. And then the second thing would be if we could have alternate shapes. So Sheila, honestly, I would send me an email if you want to provide that critique or that feedback, because I think our developers would like to hear it from a customer other than someone like myself. So Terry said, what do you suggest for removing blemishes? That's a really good suggestion. When you say blemishes, Terry, do you mean like over the skin itself, like on someone's face? We're going to, nice. Cool. I can answer that question, Terry, at the end of this, because the actually, in order to get rid of blemishes, I would recommend a wholly different system than using something like the clone tool, for example, or using the smart erase tool. I actually have there's an incredible tool to do that, and it's called frequency separation. Have you ever watched any videos on frequency separation in ACDSee, Terry? I've covered it a little bit. I don't know if I've covered it in a workshop though. Either way, I will talk about it at the end. Okay, cool. Yeah. So we'll go over that at the very end, Terry, just so we can keep the pace here. Okay, let's talk about the next thing. So, okay, let's just do a little bit of recap. So just go into view mode for these. Nice. Okay, so we talked about this image. So this image, way too much going on, way too much variation on light, too many patterns. What else was there? A shadow, complications for this image. So in general, using a tool like Smart Erase or using blended clone functions, some sort of repair tools is going to be really, really difficult to remove your subject. And that's composition at the end of the day. There's certain images that are going to be much more difficult to address compositional issues. So this one, I'm going to give this a rating of say 1 out of 10 in terms of the difficulty being 1 is very difficult and 10 being very easy. Versus this image where there's so little going on in terms of the subject removal. Oops. Oh my God. Oh, I see. I need to zoom out. There we go. Oops. Let's go to 1-to-1 there. There's so much space to work with that it just allows you to really play and be able to sort of select your subject out in a fairly easy way. Like even with the subject right here, right? This subject is like almost easier than the previous one just because there's almost full homogeneity of color around that person versus somebody like this where there's a little bit of variation in light. Super easy image to work with. So we can give this a 10 out of 10 in terms of easiness. And then this one is definitely in the middle. It's like a straight up 5 because there's so much tile work that you have to deal with here, but it's possible using the blended clone tool. Now let's give you the final example, which is going to be the fun one. So this one is pretty complicated, but we have a benefit in this image that's really useful. Okay, so we're going to take this person right here and we're going to clone her out entirely. Well, we're not going to clone her out, but we're going to paste her out. So this is another method of addressing this problem. So this would be something you could do in Ultimate, but you wouldn't be able to do in Professional. So our subject here is surrounded by highly detailed areas. And this is actually a benefit. So if you're working with somebody who's where the background is like a tree with a lot of branch detail or something like that, or you're working with somebody who's in front of like a sort of like an abstract pattern or something like that, or you're working with somebody who's in front of at least some degree of extremely detailed surface, you can utilize this tool. So what we're going to do here is we'll smart erase this person to start with, to sort of give us something to start with here. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to copy entire elements of our image like this, and we're going to move them over top of our image and sort of position them in a way that allows us to work this person out of the image. And I promise you, this is a pretty cool way of doing this. But it's got to start. We got to start somewhere. We're going to start with just by smart erasing our person out of our image. And you're going to see how bad of a job smart erase does in this instance, because there's just so much degree of detail. Whereas something like copy and pasting is actually going to be the easiest way to get someone out of the image. So this is a very common method. People use hair a lot. Like I know Alec Watson, when he did a workshop on this, what he did is he took a portion of the person's hair, and then what he did is he copy and pasted that hair into an area that had like too many flyaway hairs. And I really liked that suggestion, because it's very doable for this image as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the smart erase process just to give you an idea. So we'll go through and we'll smart erase our subject here. And again, keeping in mind the amount of detail that's in the background. We're going to select our subject. And we will go through like that. And I'm just going to see how well it runs without the other portions here. Awesome. So it leaves a pretty blurry blob here. That's okay. Let's just see if we can get some portions of this out. Oh yeah, that's not bad. Let's see if we can get this out here. Yeah, it's still pretty blurry. Okay. So what we're going to do is, that's fine. We'll take our little blurry subject right here and we'll work with this. So I'm going to use the lasso tool for almost all of these selections. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a part of my image. Let's start with this part here. I'm going to make big, really big selections. So I'll make a big old selection. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this into the foreground right here where this person's legs is. So I'm going to copy that. And then you can see the image is copied. And I'll just Control V to paste it. And we'll move it like here. Do you see how we're just moving it right over top of our subject here? For now, these are going to be unblended. So I'm not going to blend these yet. I'm just going to take parts of my image and copy and paste them. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste a bit of this area right here. And keep in mind that in order to copy and paste, you need to go back to the original image. Otherwise, you're copying from a copy where there might not be visual information in that area. So as you're copying, just always make sure to go back to your base layer. So I'm going to go back to the lasso tool, and let's just take this portion right here. Actually, you know what? Let's take even a bigger portion here. Let's take a big portion like that, because maybe we want to get rid of this this shadow here. I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste. Oops. And I'm just going to move this. Maybe I'll move it above the other base layer. And I'm just sort of going to rotate it using this tool right here. So whenever you copy and paste something, it prompts you into the move tool. So that's what we're in right now. And so the move tool gives you the ability to sort of rotate and move objects. And so I'll put it like that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a big old portion right here. So I'm going to take this and I'll just select right here. And I'll copy and paste it once again, and I'll move it to the top. And I'm just going to set it right here. And so you can start seeing all of this is unblended, but you can start to see the pattern that I'm creating here. I'm just taking bits from other parts of my image to recreate this. So I think for this portion right here, I might try to steal this right here. Let's see how it works. So versus maybe stealing a portion from over here. I'll take this. Let's see how well this works. Copy and paste, move it to the top. Not bad, not bad at all. So I'll move this right there. It's a bit of movement to it. That's okay. So before we go on to this top portion here, let's actually start blending some of these things. So we'll start with, let's start with the bottom. The bottom is right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to blend this. Does everyone see which portion I'm working with here? It's just like where the legs are covered here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a mask to each of these layers, and we're going to blend them out. So I'm going to take this base layer here. Let's rename this layer. Let's say feet. Nice. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to add a mask by clicking on the add layer mask right here. And then what that's going to do is it's going to add a mask, and that what this mask suggests right now is the whole image is still turned on in this case. So if this mask was black, for example, it would be turned off. So we're going to keep it on white. We're going to keep this mask turned on. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select a brush, our brush tool. Just a regular brush tool, not the Smart Erase brush this time, just the regular brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the black foreground color to brush onto the thumbnail itself. And what this does is it allows me to blend in with the background in a very subtle way. So you can see that I can sort of blend in and get rid of these hard lines. Now, I have my opacity set quite low, and this is a good thing from when I'm blending because it allows me to sort of like go over until I like the way that it's blended in. And I can just work my way around, and there's going to be some feet I'll have to get out later. But basically, this allows me to control the opacity of this layer. And actually, if we hide all of our other layers, you can see how gentle it is around the edge of this layer. You can see that it's sort of slowly blending in those layers together. There's a sort of a gradient from fully transparent to a fully opaque. So now what we can do is like, let's work on a different one. So which layer is this? Okay, so the wave layer. So what I can do is once again, I'll just add a little mask to that layer. And I'm just going to get rid of these hard lines around the edge of the mask using, again, the black brush. So, and what we can do is we can actually just do this. I'll hide all these other layers and I'll just work a way around. But the nice thing is when you have that reference material of the other layers here, you can see where it's blended in. Does everyone understand what I'm doing here? I'm just using pre-existing parts of my image when there's such high detail because I can copy and paste it with the illusion of it looking real. Like it really does look real the more time I spend on it, like, and brush in these elements. You're going to start to see what I mean. Now we can work on this base layer here. Once again, I'm just going to take this layer underneath where the shadow is, and I'm just going to add a little mask. And I'm just going to work out some of those hard lines here. Working out all those hard lines. This one has a bit of a color difference too, which we might be able to address in a bit. Just going to take that layer out right there. Yeah, we can definitely work on that in a sec. So now we have these feet that we need to get rid of. So what we can do is we could probably take a portion like this right here to get that out. Oh yeah, definitely. So I'll go back to the original layer here. And then I'm just going to make a copy here. Oh yeah, that's a good idea, Barry. Let's do that right now before we go on. Let's name the rest of our layers so people have an understanding of what we're copying here. So we talked about that. So this, I guess we can actually rename this. So really this is just the legs. So this covers the legs. This layer right here covers the lower wave, that area right here. So I'll rename it. I'll call it lower wave. And then this area right here covers the shadow. So we'll call that the shadow. Everyone can see that. And then I added this layer, which is looks like it's like lower torso, which we'll get to in a moment. And then we just added this last layer here. Oh, there it is, which we're going to call the feet. There we go. So we added the feet layer here, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this part right here. And then I'm just going to keep the rotation in mind for when I'm doing stuff like this. So I can kind of match it up with the patterns that exist beneath it. Now, when we're doing this, we want to just sort of keep in mind, again, the benefit of this is because it's so high detail, right? That kind of allows us to get away with some things that we wouldn't be able to in other images, right? And it's just the process of us blending these in just in any area where there's a lot of high detail, like in the case of somebody's hairline, right? Where you could get rid of you can get rid of those stray hairs by using copying and pasting hair from another portion of so we could just go around and apply this and sort of merge these two layers together by just using the blending function. So that's not bad. So let's do this upper torso layer now. And then we'll finally do the head and just cut this out right here. It's really just any sharp edges that we want to get rid of here. And it's a lot of repeat, but it's valuable. There we go. I might even want to stretch this one slightly, so I'll have to get rid of that. And then let's see, for this portion right here, I might reuse this area. Oh, actually, you know what? For this part, that's very good. We can take this part of our wave right here and use it in this area. So I'll go back to the base layer here. I'll make a copy of this right here, and I will paste it once again. And I will, let's see if I can move that over. Like right there. And we'll call this the head. And once again, just adding a little layer there. And I'll just get rid of it over here entirely. So we can go do that. Just going to brush it away using the black brush over top of the thumbnail itself, the mask thumbnail. And I can sort of work it in there. And then we just need to fill out this last little center line area here. And let's take this piece right here. See if this looks any good copied. And I'll call that the shoulders. Right there. Maybe spin it a bit. And it needs to be above that head layer so we can see the wave portion there. Let's see how well we can blend this. Blend that right there. Make sure the waves come through above, and then just slowly take them out right here. And all I'm doing is just adjusting the nib size as I go through here. And I might want to do something in this one corner to fix that area there, but that's looking pretty good. That's not looking good though. I might have been trying to get away with more than I could. Yeah, maybe more like that. And I can always reverse the color of my brush back to white to brush parts of my image back on like that. And then I really just need to fill this last little section here. Let's see if I can just take a portion from right here, copy and paste. Oops. And that's what happens when I copy and paste from a layer that is a layer that isn't the base layer here. So just take a piece here, and see if I can move it in place. And move it up to the top. Maybe move it around slightly. There we go. And once again, blend it in. And once we zoom out, we'll be able to see which parts of my image were successful versus which parts of my image would need more attention. But there it is. I would say that the only part I really dislike about this is this area, this shadow right here, because it's slightly different colored than the one to the left of it. And we might be able to address this by taking something like white balance and just slightly tweaking the white balance for this one layer. Alternatively, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to achieve a white balance. It's going to make this seem homogeneous. Alternatively, what we can do is we can actually take a white balance and put it at the very top of our image, and that's going to give it just a slight color change will homogenize my whole image here. I still would like to work with this. Maybe I would feather it slightly or something like that to address this. Maybe I'd copy a different portion of my image. But you get the idea when it comes to copy and paste elements and utilizing the brush tool along with the mask to sort of mask out it. But I would say overall, I think that's a fairly faithful removal of that subject here. And if we were to remove all these other images and just looked at the first, you can see that we tried to use as much context as possible, and the waves being so complicated, I feel like we can justify the removal of this subject fairly easily with just using copied elements. So I think this is a pretty funky way to remove people from your images. Like I said, especially if you have areas of high complexity and lots of areas that you can copy and paste from. This is, don't disregard this as a major tool in your toolbox from something as simple as smart erasing a subject. Smart erasing a subject is going to be much faster than this, especially in areas with really low complexity, like we gave you the example with the snow in our second image there. And obviously our first image didn't have enough, the very bad image didn't have enough to work from to copy and paste to really get a faithful removal. But this is an image with super high complexity, but lots of room to copy and paste from, that we can actually totally copy and paste our way to a final product here that's fairly good. There's a couple things that I could spend another 30 minutes tweaking and working on, but for the purpose of a workshop, I think getting rid of our subject here was fairly easy, and something that we could really do quite easily with just using the lasso tool and then the masking functions. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions in relation to sort of either copy and pasting or blending or cloning in general? This, again, the whole purpose of this workshop was really just to emphasize ways that you can utilize these tools and looking at your images and being critical about the difficulty of them in order to sort of get the best result. Let's have a sip of tea here. Thanks, Freddie. Appreciate that. Barry said, a suggestion, emphasize the importance of, oh yeah, we did that, right. Yeah, I guess with the exception of this one little layer right here, which was, yeah. Gives you an idea of sort of where those spaces are if we go about the naming function. And I appreciate that, Barry, that is helpful. But provided that people don't have any more questions for me, that's sort of the workshop today. And I'll just give a little summary of what I talked about. Let's save that. Save it as, yeah. We talked about, first and foremost, we looked at images that were difficult. So we looked at this image here. Go to view. Film strip mode. There we go. We looked at an image that was very difficult, that posed a lot of problems in terms of making a faithful removal of a subject. We looked at an area that we could simply use basically the smart erase tool on its own to delete or to remove a subject. Then we looked at a complicated selection, one that would require us to use the blending clone tool to sort of copy and paste elements using the right click and moving those onto the areas where we removed our subject here. And then we looked at a completely different method of removing a subject. Where's my layer here? We looked at just using the copy and paste function itself, along with layers and masking, to address the removal of the subject and to sort of use pre-existing elements. Barry said, how can blend modes be incorporated with the techniques you covered? Yeah, that's a great question. So blend modes, for those who are unfamiliar, are when you have these layers here, each layer has a variety of blends that can be applied. Blends work very similar to reducing the opacity on a layer, but each blend has a certain different degree of criteria that's applied. So when you blend a layer, it's going to take into account different things. So let's take the shadow layer right here and we'll apply a blend mode. So a screen blending would be applied like that. Multiply would be applied like that. Basically, it keeps in mind the content that exists beneath it, which in this case is the base layer, and tries to do a blend of the two things together. So Barry, when you would want to maybe apply a blend in an area is when you want to preserve some degree of qualities that exist on the base layer. But the other thing too is you can copy and paste elements in a more creative context and then a blend of those layers on top of one another. I mean, I do this all the time in graphic design. You use copied elements with blends, whether it be text to create the effect of like a shadow underneath the text. It would really be worth playing around with it, but depending on the content, you would want to keep in mind something that's existing on the base layer that you are trying to preserve, because that's when the blend in this case is where that blend is going to apply. Terry asked, do you have a video on moving a person or object from one picture to another? I don't. I could certainly cover that. It would be easier to cover in a tutorial, I would think, than a workshop. It would take a long time, I think, for a workshop. I mean, even this was sort of stretching it in terms of taking time. The way you would do that, Terry, is by copying an element or saving the person isolated from the background as a PNG and moving it on to another image. If I'm being honest, the best software for that is actually not Ultimate, it's actually Gemstone. Gemstone is actually more designed for that exact purpose because Gemstone is a multi-document editor. But I can cover it for both softwares. Terry, if I was to cover like copying a person from one image and moving it to another in ACDSee and in Gemstone, would that help you? Or do you exclusively use Ultimate? Or I'm just going to get a feel for what would be useful for you. And you're welcome, Barry. Thank you. The reason why I say it's easier in Gemstone is because Gemstone is like I said, an MDI software, a multi-document editor. So you can actually open up multiple images at the same time and edit multiple images at the same time. But if you use Ultimate, I can focus on Ultimate for that. I'm actually going to write that down because that's a great idea for a tutorial, and I haven't covered it. So moving person from one image to another. And then I'm going to write down Ultimate and Gemstone. Yeah, cool, Terry. That's a great suggestion. I'll cover it soon. I have to work on another tutorial for next week. So you should see that next week. I can probably get a video up on our YouTube page there. Is everyone familiar with our YouTube page? Have you subscribed? I'll just send a link right now so you can. I upload all of our workshops here. So our workshop today will be uploaded to this portal here. And you can find all of our past workshops just in the playlists tab on ACDSee, with our most recent being, channel selections and selection basket workshop. But we're going to be talking, I'll upload this workshop today to our YouTube probably within a couple days. So, but that's it for me today, friends. I'm going to mute my mic. If you have any further questions, just shoot them in the comments and I'll try to get to them. Otherwise, you can please email me at a price at acdsystems.com. And otherwise, I wish you a happy day and yeah, take care. And I'll talk to you next month for another workshop. Thanks, everybody.